Hello and welcome to the Fairbanks Year-Round Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Blake Schreckice with the Summit Realty Group, and today I'm joined by Mr. Geoff Welch, I guess from Dateline, business consultant, a bunch of other things that we're going to cover today. Thanks for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me out.
Absolutely. So I always like to start with how you made it to Fairbanks.
I have been, I like to say I've been in Fairbanks my whole life.
Oh.
I was born in Anchorage.
He's
My
been lying.
dark shame
Yep, he's been seated.
About the first 18 months I lived in Anchorage. I had no control over that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been in Fairbanks the whole time effectively. And so my wife was an Air Force transplant and is bewildered that my daughter literally has gone to the same elementary school I went to, the same junior high that I went to, and knock on wood, is a year from graduating from the same high school that I went to. So that melts her brain. But to me, that's Fairbanks. That's Fairbanks.
Well, it used to be normal that you would stick around where you're at, because travel was so hard. And I should actually look back, because this is interesting to me. There is a tipping point, of course, where travel got a lot easier, and then people started moving more. And now it is really wild. I remember I was talking to a girl who used to live down in Arkansas, and she had never left the state, and she was like 16, 17 years old. It's like, and Arkansas is not a big state, not like Alaska, So it's like, holy moly, you can go an hour and you can be out of the state. So, but yeah, I am swinging back. I don't know about you, but the amount of, for me at least, the hardship of creating a community around yourself is no longer worth me moving, because I've moved a little bit. And a lot of people are always, I think, looking for that next, the grass is greener kind of thing. But so what made you, so did you move away for like college or anything like that?
No, I have been here literally the whole time.
Yeah.
So my wife ended up here, I think somewhere right around 1990. She's a couple of years older than I am. So I was finishing up high school. She was finishing up college. And I was saying, I kind of like this person. Yeah. She wanted nothing to do with me.
I know.
But eventually I convinced her. But so like at that point, it was like when we started dating, it was like she was out of college and she was ready to establish her life. I took a stab at college, and at that point at 18, I did not have the discipline to do that.
Yeah. Same.
And so I washed out pretty quick, and we were married in like 97, and we were just ready to start our life, and we were both had been established here at that point.
Yeah.
And I have never particularly had a great desire. I love to travel. I love to go visit other places. We're going to Hawaii in a few weeks, and I'm all about that. I want to go there. But I've never had a strong desire to be somewhere else long term. And as we're both getting a little older, and we're considering what retirement could look like down the road. And we've talked about, would we leave? Where would we go?
Right.
And the idea of community, I think, is so foundational. So my family's here, her family's here, there's that. But then there are just all these people that for the past 27 plus years for her, we've built relationship with, and starting over from zero, that seems like a really big deal to me. Maybe it's not as big a deal as it seems.
I think it is.
But it feels like, man, how do you, at this point in your life, just basically say, I'm going to start over with 90% of the relationships that are like my day-to-day relationships?
I think it's, pause. So almost 30 years married then in a few years.
27 in about 6 weeks.
On that, yeah. You're pretty young for that. Jeez. So congrats to you on that. But yeah, the community stuff, like I think people really underrate it the younger you are, and then the older you get, the more you realize what your community does for you. And beyond, really everything. It touches everything. It's our community found my house that I'm living in, even though I'm a real estate agent. It was a friend of a friend's like, hey, this person's having a garage sale. Come by the garage sale they're about to sell. And there's you hear a million of these stories. And being someone who's new in a place is, for me, exciting and fun. For like 6 months, and then you're home. It's just like buying a new car. Although maybe someone really loves cars a lot more than me, but you buy a new car, it just becomes the car you drive every day. And the same with the house. There actually was a really interesting study, because weather seems to be a big thing, especially if you live in Fairbanks. People are moving for better weather. But that's not just Fairbanks. It's a lot of areas they want warmer, they want colder, they want 4 seasons, whatever the reason may be. They have found no correlation between happiness and the weather of where you live. So like some of the happiest countries are Nordic, all that, So if people can separate that, and again, you don't have to live in Fairbanks, wherever you want to live. but just realize probably the things that's actually going to move the needle on your happiness is the people that are around you.
Yeah.
So if you want to take roots and sit in a spot, but again, there's a lot of nomads I could be wrong about, but anyways, that's interesting. So your relationship with Fairbanks, you've been here. Has it been, hey, I've loved it from the beginning? As with everybody else, have you been more like, I hate this place, it's too cold or this or that? Or like, what's that look like for you?
I think, Fairbanks does seem to be a very polarizing place. And especially what you see with like military transplants, it seems like there are people who either cannot wait to retire here or are itching to get out from the third week they're here. They're like, I cannot wait to leave.
Yeah.
So it does seem like it is very polarizing. Having grown up here, though, it's just regular to me. Like people talk about the dark, and maybe as I get older, I start to notice it a little more. But the dark is just part of it. We sleep all summer with our blinds open.
Really?
We don't. It's the daylight 24. It doesn't faze me. It is just.
He also spells his name wrong, so I know we've already talked about this.
I spell my name correctly, and I'll tell you, so here's the inside arrogant secret, is there is never a moment when I see someone spell Jeff that I don't immediately think, I'm just a little better. And there's no basis for that.
Yeah.
There's none at all, other than there's just, that special Geoff.
Yeah,
name.
Yeah, you've got that. Going to Joffrey.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
But it just seems like, Fairbanks is just home. It's just like all the things about it that other people point out that are either fantastic or, because I'm an indoor cat too. Like I don't particularly love to be in the outdoors. I don't hunt. I don't fish. I don't do a lot of those things that you might say, oh, well, it affords you these things. And so you put up with some of the cold days and that kind of stuff. I don't really do those things, but it's just the thing that I know and the thing that I'm comfortable with. And I probably am very much a creature of habit.
Yeah.
I do like to, break the rules, but I like to do it in a very calculated fashion. And you're constantly looking for the edges of like, what are the rules that can be broken? How can I, massage a situation in order to make it work the best for me?
Yeah.
And so I think that part of that is because I love the comfort of the known. And so I'm just looking for, as long as 80% of this stays the same, I want to be creative with the 20% around the edges. And so I think that for me, there's something about having the consistency of a place that I know, the consistency of the people around me. And I mean, don't get me started on Fred Meyer changing where things are.
Oh my gosh.
Because that is, I can't deal with it. My whole life is up in turmoil because I don't know where to find the bread anymore.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting pairing though. Because I feel a lot of this too. Like I'm very scheduled. We were just talking about like to-do lists. I have like 15 different to-do lists for different things. And cause I don't rely on my memory cause I just forget everything, but I like being all these schedules. However, what you're saying, like breaking the rules, I've always, since my first job and before then probably, I always thought of it as kind of this optimization. So I would get, I used to clean for the school district up here and we would do the job. And I was like, man, there's a much better way to do this, And a lot of people do think that way, where it's like, all right, let's totally shift up, like take it all the way back to what it is. We want the thing to be clean or whatever the job is, and then work back as if we don't know anything about how to do it, So where do you find like having most things scheduled, or that may be the wrong word, but most things being very similar allows you that freedom of those big decisions?
I'm a big fan of what I call planned spontaneity, which sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but here's what I mean. If you plan enough of the things so that these are the responsibilities I have, these are the things I need to get done, these are the things that are mission critical for me to accomplish.
Yes.
I know those things, I have them organized. Then the space that you have to say when something interesting comes up, I'm going to do that instead because I know how to renegotiate the things that already exist because I have a plan for those things.
Yeah.
I think very often people think of like, I just want to be free. I just want to, spontaneous. And then they end up feeling overwhelmed. They end up feeling a little freaked out because they are not necessarily accounting for the things they have to do when they want to go have fun. Right. And so I prefer, and people are different, right? I'm not saying there's one size that fits all, but I prefer to have a pretty clear picture of what my world looks like at any given time. And then I get to make the choice. So I read this book many years ago called Getting Things Done by a guy named David Allen. And what he talks about in that book is effectively, he's like, I'm the laziest person you're ever going to meet. And the reason that I have developed a system for organizing my life in this way is because I want to know on a given Wednesday afternoon if doing nothing is acceptable. Yeah, that's kind of my goal, is to just chill out, and I want to go like cut my bonsai trees or whatever, and you only know that if you are organized with all the things you need to manage. So,
right. Knowing what your needle movers are and being able to implement those on a somewhat regular basis. I feel the same way, because sometimes, excuse me, especially, and this is like a little teaser, I don't want to get too deep into the overwhelm stuff, but we are going to be focusing on that, is you, with any business, there's a million things to do and you can chase them all, but you don't know maybe you don't know what's moving the needle. Yeah. And then you get tired and you take a day off, but you feel really guilty about the days off. Like those are, so like I really love, that's why again, very similar, it sounds like to you, like my week and everything is planned out. So like this weekend, I'm going down to Anchorage, I'm doing something, and it's like, I don't have to feel guilty, because I know if I put in the time, these 4 days here, I'm going to not feel guilty then. But a lot of people don't know what that is, and they still feel guilty all the time. You feel guilty when you're working, when you're not working, it's like this weird. Yeah. So it's a big balance, but pause. So how did you get into, so you're here, you're born and raised here. It's great. Met your wife. Was your first like business foray going into business Dateline? Was that okay?
Yeah. And it was totally accidental.
Okay.
I probably, the short story is, I just wanted to keep my job. So I started at Dateline about 6 months after we got married. The turn of 1998, back in the 1900s.
Man, the turn of the millennium.
Yes.
Almost.
Excuse me. I started there, low man on the totem pole, working 3 to midnight. I mean, I was just Joe Nobody. And so I had not gone to college, but I wasn't just going to sit around and do nothing. I was a hard worker, had a good work ethic. I just couldn't figure out how to make college make sense for me. Right. So I went in there, and I think that I proved myself pretty early on that I was going to show up. I was going to work smart. I was going to be a key player on that team. And with a handful of years, I had opportunities to take on some management responsibilities and to kind of be a more primary person. And about 7 years into that, the owner says, I'm looking to sell. Do you want to buy? And he had a son who wanted to come back into the business, and I was just ignorant is really the right word for it. And it turned out to be a wonderful opportunity and a great situation, but not because I had calculated that, not because I had really figured it out. My calculus was effectively, I have a feeling if somebody else buys this place, they're going to want to replace me, because I was kind of running the operation at that point. They're going to want to do that and not pay me to do it.
I see.
So a great way to get to stay employed is to buy this place, right? So I really was the poster child for buying a job, right? That's what I effectively did. And it took a lot of years to figure out the difference between being a manager of things and being an owner of things.
So do you feel like, well, first off, why are you working till midnight at a printing shop? What are you doing?
In ye olde 1998, Kinko's was open 24 hours a day at those points. Yeah. And so there was just a lot more work, and machines were slower. The whole, everything is a PDF now. Like everything comes to us online now. Everything is so simple from a setup standpoint.
Yeah.
We can take most of what comes to us and have it printing on a machine in a few minutes.
Right.
Whereas back then there were a lot of setup. I remember there was this magazine called the Alaska Farmer. And in order to prepare it for printing, it had to process on this device for like 45 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And this old guy would come in, and he would come in at like 10 o'clock at night, right? But he wanted to see a proof of this thing. And it would take an hour for us to generate one print. And if anything wasn't right about it, you're starting over from nothing. Yeah. Now it's all very simple. So everything took longer back then. So you just needed more machine hours in order to do the work.
And I'm not trying to downplay this at all. So I'm actually pretty good friends. I think I was telling you with Chuck Lincoln. Sure. And so I actually I don't know why I love printing. like hearing about it and everything anyways. But do you feel at that time, was this going to be like, hey, I'm going to make a career out of this? Or was this like a stopping point for you? Like, what did you think when you...
I don't know that I did. I am a late bloomer. So at that point, I was 29 at that point. And I feel like I was still figuring myself out. I still had no clear picture. My wife, when she was in college, I mean, she went to college and went straight to get her master's afterwards. And she just knew like what she wanted to do. She's never been overly ambitious in terms of like she wants to go rule the world, but she knew what she wanted and she was in pursuit of that thing. And I was like, that kind of looks interesting, and well, that's neat over there. I had no like real strong direction. So I joke sometimes that I sort of backed into something that I was really good at. I discovered along the way, oh, I'm kind of wired for this.
Well, that's interesting because you always hear, and a lot of people think, I think, with like peak athletes, like they're doing their sport or musicians or whatever when they're like 4, and you're like, that's what it takes to get there. And I've been hearing more and more about, hey, that may not always be the best way to do it. Like maybe a wider breadth of,
cross training.
Cross training. Or what, again, and we're just talking athletes here, but so it's really interesting to hear you, because a lot of business owners that are doing it and doing great or whatever, you're like, I was selling suckers to kids in elementary school, and you could see the path pretty clearly. But for you, you don't feel like there was any signs of that.
I do see those signs. Yes. I can remember when I was probably 8 or 10, the Nintendo Power Glove really date myself, right?
That's awesome.
That was like a big thing. And I remember I made this newsletter for my parents describing all of the virtues of this Nintendo Power Glove and why it would be a great gift for me for Christmas. So, I mean, I was kind of like, I was selling at some point at a young age and wanting to persuade people and wanting to like find something that I wanted and figure out how to get it, right? And that's sort of the nature of being a business owner. Is it's not, I mean, I think we think about the money in a lot of cases, and that's certainly an important part of it. But there's a lot more to, I think, what being a small business owner nets you as a person than just dollars and cents. There's like I got to take my daughter to school or pick her up 90% of the days from the time that she went to kindergarten to the time that she got her license last year. And, now that doesn't have to happen anymore. But like those were important things to our family that, and my wife had a more rigid work schedule. And so I had a lot more flexibility in my life. And that was a fundamental component of what I want out of work and life is not just the money, although I will take it. If anyone has a bunch of it and wants to spend it at Dateline or, just endow it to me, I'll entertain that.
Yeah, you're not going to turn it down.
But that's not the primary driver where I say I'm willing to sacrifice other things to have more of that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there is a tipping point where it 100% had to be the primary driver for everybody at some point when you have nothing. But then there's whatever the number is. I've heard 70,000. That's probably gone higher now, where like maybe 100,000, where now money no longer equates to more happiness for you. And I don't know that it's more happiness. I think it's less stress. If you have enough money that you're not worried about your bills every month and your stress is at a minimum, then money is not doing much extra for your, well-being. So you got that tipping point, and then you're making decisions not solely based off the money side. You're looking at like, hey, how does this affect my life as a whole? Which I think is a beautiful thing about business is you can cultivate within reason, depends on what business you're in. We had Sassy Scoops, Sarah. Her ice cream business is very, very different. She's open one day. She pre-orders ice cream. I would have never thought that would work. I was like, who is pre-ordering their, sweets basically, but it obviously it does its thing. So, it's wonderful that you're able to cultivate something around the life that you want to build. So you, back to the Dateline there. You bought yourself your job because you were so concerned you might get the boot, depending on the new ownership or whatever it may be. And did you, I'm sure you must have been excited at that time. Did you feel like you were prepared? Did you feel like you had everything you needed to know to buy this business? It was a good purchasing decision, or it was like, hey, I'm just doing this. You know what I mean? Like, were you running numbers and like, what did that look like?
Oh, no. I did feel that way. I felt like this is a great idea. Of course. I mean, there was trepidation. It's not like this is a slam dunk. Nothing could ever go wrong. But it wasn't, I was not running numbers, like in terms of like penciling it out and like, you know, where at what point does this become an asset for me, you know, and really starts. I wasn't thinking in those terms at all.
Yeah.
I was very much thinking in the, can we make this work? I like the work that I do. I think I'm good at it. My wife jokes around that at this point I am unemployable. She says you could never work for another person. I was like, I sort of want to prove her wrong, but also I don't want to do that at all. But at that point, no. At that point, I was very much just figuring out how to make the transaction work, because it was something that I felt like I wanted to do.
I've had the same thing, and I've told this story before on here, I'm sure, but my grandpa offered, he's like, hey, nobody else wants the family business. It was a furniture store down in Arkansas. I was living here. He's like, why don't you think about it for a year? And if you want to do this, come down and take over the business. I did think about it for a year. We moved down, and I didn't ask for numbers. I didn't look at like it didn't even occur to me to do so. You know. And we get there, and it was not profitable, and so it ended up being great in other ways. But the business side, after about 2 years, we ended up shutting the thing down. And so if you look at that purely again from the money side, you'd be like, what an absolute failure! You moved, it cost you money. Eventually, we did move back. But other things is I got to spend 40 hours a week with my grandpa, who passed away like shortly after we closed the business down, which was awesome. One of my clients from that got me on to being a real estate agent, which has been kind of where I've excelled. And all these things that have happened that are positive. So being able to look out for those. But so I totally get it. So it was more like, we'll think about this later. Again, to me, and maybe you feel the same way, it didn't occur to me to look. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to ignore the numbers and hope for the best. Like, I wasn't even thinking about the numbers. I was just like, I'm sure it's profitable. You know, he's selling.
I'd been around, so I saw how it worked. So I knew it was viable. And I knew enough about some of the numbers to know that it wasn't crazy. But no, I wasn't doing, like, when I think about it now, when I think about how someone would evaluate my business now, because you know I'm at a later stage in my business, and the idea of what would it look like if I wasn't, because right now I'm not operationally there. I drop in for a few hours a week, check in on my manager, and I'm much more on the business development side of things. But I'm not in an operational standpoint. So when I look at like, well, if my manager wanted to buy it, like how would that transaction look, and how would someone evaluate what it's worth? Like it's a whole other language than anything I spoke when I was 29, right?
When you move into those too, you see this very naturally, going from young, taking up a business, willing to take more risk, and at the end, you're more like, hey, I've seen a few things now, and
it's been an education.
Absolutely. So.
Well, and to what you're saying about the experience, I think that is something that generally, and maybe less so now because people are more free agents, but that separates entrepreneurs from somebody who is more inclined to take on a traditional job is this idea that you are constantly learning, and everything that doesn't work right is a teacher. It is something that is showing you how to do it differently and better next time, because everything is iterative. Everything is, how do I refine what I'm doing to make it work better along the way, and that, because that's your survival mechanism as a small business owner, right? Like you just can't stay one thing for very long, because the market will say, we don't want that thing anymore, and you'll say, why not? And you're in bad shape, right? It changes so quickly, and in some cases it is. I mean, it's survival of the fittest, right? Like the market does not care about you. The market has no soft spot for you. And so you're constantly having to evaluate. And so I look at the last nearly 20 years in ownership, and it's like, well, all of these things were shaping and getting me closer to who I am now. Whether there's some grand purpose, I don't know. But but I definitely recognize that there is no era. There have been a lot of different kinds of seasons at Dateline. There's not been a single era that wasn't teaching me something about how to be better in the next chapter, and how to reevaluate what I'm doing to do it in a more effective way.
So you've moved past what I think a lot of business owners get stuck in. So you've moved past where you're in the day-to-day, and you're more oversight, big picture guy, I'm sure. And then of course you're now leaning into business consulting and things that obviously positively affect your business too, I would hope, where you get to be able to sit back and think these big ideas a little bit more easily. I'm assuming that.
Yeah, it is a weird transition though, because I think that, we talked about being organized and sort of scheduled, and I definitely enjoy the dopamine reward of you go into Dateline, there's a pile of work that needs to be done. You leave at night, there's a new pile of work that's completed, and you sort of like
stop it.
It feels great to
I'm
say,
getting the feeling you just talking about it.
I made that progress.
Yeah.
And when your job becomes, I think about long range planning, and I develop a scheme to help us be successful over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. None of that bears any reward today.
Here's what you do.
Okay,
I'm going to help you.
Tell me.
Is you get yourself a wood stove and you hand split all your wood for the year. That is the most satisfying.
I bet.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You can do big picture stuff all day long, but with you, every stack of wood is just like warmth. So no,
I love it. But yeah, you're trying to build in those mechanisms. So, so for me, very much, it is the most valuable work that I do is thinking. And yet that doesn't give me the jolt that I always want. And so I make sure that there are other little things that are part of my day that give me some of that sort of immediate, real-time gratification of feeling like I did something.
What's an example of something you've instituted?
Like, this is going to sound stupid, but I work at home for the most part. And every Friday I start the laundry in the morning, and there's nothing that is more of my favorite thing in the world than having the laundry done before I go to bed on Friday night.
Again, we're going to go back to the sleeping with the blinds open. His name spelled with a G. There's like some things that are just wrong with you, man.
All of that is like
Have you heard this before?
Instant gratification, and it's also like there's this sequencing element, right?
Yeah.
I think that so my daughter hates to do laundry, and she likes to start the laundry at like 8:00 at night. And it drives me. She's been around the house for 6 hours, and she's starting it at 8:00 at night. And I'm like, the machine does 90% of the work. Think about doing laundry.
Yeah.
Doing laundry is putting some things inside a machine. It works for an hour. Moving them to another machine. It works for an hour. And then you got to fold it. And that could be complicated. I do all the laundry because I like it to be a certain way. I mean, but if it takes 2 hours, 15 minutes to do laundry, you've done 18 minutes of work, maybe.
Yeah.
And so part of that is the game for me of saying, what things in what sequence do I need to be approaching things so that I can multiply my effort in as many directions as possible.
Yeah.
The dishwasher can be washing while the washing machine is doing clothes.
Yeah.
But that's all like a metaphor for the rest of the work in general, right? Like, I think as a small business owner, we sometimes get stuck in that mindset of we have to do all the things. We're the smartest person. No one can do it like we do. And we become a single lane.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can run down that lane, right?
Yeah.
When you start to say, how do I leverage other people? How do I leverage systems? How do I leverage equipment? You start to think in terms of what is the order of operations here that allows me to get to the end of the day, week, month, whatever, and have actually accomplished most because I didn't have to do all of it.
Right.
I just had to be the person who was like, tapping this person on the shoulder.
Delegated
and
out,
to me, that is fun. Like that is a fun math problem to some degree of figuring out how to increase efficiency. But the challenge then remains at the end of the day, the more I delegate, the less I really have to do that I get that feedback from. So it comes from laundry. Yeah. So it comes from things like that where I'm like, okay, it felt good to have accomplished that thing. Now I'm going to go plan the next big idea.
This is interesting. So is there, there's obviously a benefit. You do have to move forward in stages.
Yeah.
But is there, you see like in Japan, this guy who makes boots by hand and he's been doing it for 60 years.
Yeah.
And he does everything. He's a one-man shop.
Sure.
And there's some kind of beauty to that. Am I wrong?
Oh no.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So it's not so much that that's wrong, but maybe that's not what everybody wants. They maybe need to move into that next stage where they're being able to have oversight and scale things up. Is that
well? And I think it comes down to what you want to accomplish through your business, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things I talk about a lot with clients is anything is possible, and anything is like you can do whatever you want. The problem is if you want something that you don't have, but you're not doing anything to get that thing.
Yeah.
So very often it's easy to fall into the trap of I started this business or I bought into this business because I loved making boots, or there was something about it that was just really pleasing. And after a while, though, I think most small business owners, especially early stage small business owners, there's so many other things you have to do, and you're like, man, half the time I don't get to make boots.
Yeah.
Because there's all of these other things that need to happen for the business to run, and market and accounting and like all these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be easy to fall into a trap of, now I bought a job, right? Now I work for this thing because I have to feed the beast and make it. And it's not what I want anymore. It's what the business demands from me.
Right.
And a lot of people I talk to have never said out loud or written down, this is what I want. And so I think of like, if your business was an employee, instead of this, entity that's, a corporation or whatever, what if you thought of it like an employee and you said, it has a job to do? Like any employee, you would write a job description or something that says, this is the thing I need to get done, and I need you to do these things. Will you take on this job? If you thought about your business in those regards, I think it fundamentally changes the way that you view that, where it's like, what is this thing supposed to do for me? Because no one hires an employee to make their life more difficult. Mm-hmm. It happens sometimes, but no one says, things are working a little bit too well. I'm going to hire someone to sort of like make things harder for me.
Right.
And yet sometimes that's how we feel about our business, is like, oh, this thing is like, it always wants something from me at the most inopportune time.
Yeah.
And until you say, well, what is it supposed to do for you? Like, what do you want from it? You can't start to optimize for those kind of outcomes.
There's a specific look, I think, in business owners' eyes when the business is running them. Like, seriously, I've met like where it's, you can tell, and maybe they start the conversation if you're talking about business with them where, things are good, this and that. Like, that's usually how it starts. And then you get down more nitty gritty and you start asking more questions, and you just realize, and again, it's not a dead look, but it's almost harrowing where you're like, everything they do is in their whole life feels like in service of the business. Yeah. And the business, which again is not a living entity, but it kind of feels that way, when they're talking about it, is kind of eating their lunch every single day. So let's start from like the very beginning, and we're going to do a lot of broad stuff here. Okay. Someone starts a business. Mm-hmm. It is unbelievably overwhelming, all the things. And this is what you've been talking about already. Mm-hmm. There's so many things to be done. And at least for me in my like real estate career, what happened with me at least is I just ignored a lot of things. Yeah. And I don't know if that's always necessary. Like maybe you could plan enough ahead and have things going so smooth that you didn't have to. But like taxes, that was New Year's problem, man. Like, I hope I didn't owe too much, you know what I'm saying? Like there's just stuff like that. And then you're like, oh, I didn't save my receipts or whatever it may be. So what would be, and again, I know this is a very broad question, but somebody that's just starting out, what would be something that you would tell them or give them like, hey, I understand you're overwhelmed, but here's something that maybe could help.
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to that. One, I think when someone is in that state of overwhelm, it is hard for them to see beyond their current circumstance. It can be very difficult to say, hey, you've been, hustling for 18 hours a day. Let's dream big dreams. Right? It's like, I'm trying to survive right now. So usually what I'm working on is one, trying to figure out how to just cancel the chaos in the short term. How can we help you to renegotiate maybe some of the things that are on your plate? Figure out ways to delegate, figure out ways to minimize the pain you feel in a moment so that you can begin to think beyond right now. The clearer someone is, especially early on, about what they want long term, the more they can bear the pain of today. So I love Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he, is working with people who are in a concentration camp, right? That seems to be, I don't know that I've ever had a problem that bad. I'm fairly confident I have not, right? Yeah. And so to think about how we process our pain, how we process the challenges that we're facing, I think when you know that outcome, when you want to run a marathon, you get up at 5 a.m. and go run, and there's a reason why. That pain serves this outcome, right? I want to run this marathon. Now, I don't know why anyone would want to run a marathon. It doesn't compute for me, but lots of people do. They're doing it every day, right?
Right.
And yet if there isn't that outcome and you're just like, I just get up and run at 5 a.m. in the dark and the cold because I'm supposed to,
right?
That pain, we process that very differently in terms of how we think about that. So when we can tie whatever is happening today to some long-term outcome, it changes our perspective radically.
Right.
So the first thing that I mean, it sounds a little trite, but I think the first thing that we need to be thinking about is way down the road is what do I ultimately want from this thing?
Right.
And I can't have it today. And that's a hard thing. Our culture doesn't really love delayed gratification, right? We don't really like promote the idea that doing something difficult now could get you something better later. We just want the better part right this minute, right?
Right.
But to put ourselves in a position where we can say, I know that the effort that I'm expending today, I know the work that I'm doing today is building towards this thing.
Right.
I think it helps to optimize what we do to some degree. I don't want to belabor this, but I have one other little story here.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
This will also date me further. There's this classic scene from I Love Lucy, old TV show.
Yeah.
And they're in the chocolate factory.
Oh, yeah.
And I think even people who don't know I Love Lucy may have some context for this, but their job is to go and these chocolates are coming down the conveyor belt and they're supposed to be wrapping them up and they can't miss a single one. And her and Ethel are working as fast as they can and the conveyor belt keeps going faster and faster. I think that as small business owners, we feel like that in a lot of cases. Right. Things are speeding up. Everything has to be dealt with. And I think that what really exists are 3 different kinds of chocolates. They're not all created equal. Mm-hmm. Some are things that we can only do. They're things that we absolutely have to have our eyes on. Some of those things are things that still need to be done, but someone else can do. And some are things that we could let go of. And it can be really hard sometimes to say, actually, I can either renegotiate this and say, I can't do this now. That's going to have to happen later. Mm-hmm. Taxes are a New Year's problem.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've calculated that, then okay, right? You know? And some of these things, I just feel like I should do them, or I see everyone else doing them. And so I feel like I am committed to this. Right. When what we could really say is, if this doesn't serve the outcome you're hoping for, could you let it go? I had a client who was going to, they were at the edge of sanity. Like they were really hurting. And they had a sick dog on top of a lot of really complicated stuff at their office. And they hadn't slept well in days. Mm-hmm. And they said, I got to get on this plane and go to this conference tonight. And I just don't know how I'm going to do it. And I mean, as a coach and a consultant, I just get to ask questions that they don't necessarily have to work, but you just sort of posing ideas. And I'm like, what would happen if you didn't get on the plane? And they talked through it and they realized their flight could be refunded. Like they still had that ability. They'd bought insurance or whatever. They talked to the person from this conference and they're like, we can actually do a thing that because you've paid for the conference, we're going to send you all these materials and we're going to like do a special thing for you. Mm-hmm. So they had the ability to still get most of what they wanted from the conference, even if they didn't leave. And they spent 4 days sort of like resetting themselves to hit the ground running. And most of us don't ever ask the question, what if I don't get on the plane? Mm-hmm. We say, we bought the ticket, we're obligated. There's no way to stop this train. I don't know that that's always true. Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we need to be examining what can we let go of that's not serving this outcome?
It's interesting. I'm trying to remember the book. I must have not read it. Maybe I got a synopsis or something. But there's like basically
Spark Notes.
Spark Notes versions of like the manifesto of quitting, which was really good because you know this. We never quit. You know, there are some things that you can never quit. You know, the safety of your country and all that. Where that quote comes from, but there's other things where they're dragging you down. Like you 100%. Not only can you quit, you probably should because this is you got to quit some things to be able to take other things on. Yeah. So I was going to move this from new to, we'll say profitable. Well, look, maybe back up here. I think there's a lot of businesses when you are not a business owner, or at least when I was younger, I would look at business owners and they seem to me to be the picture of success. and they had these cool businesses or whatever.
Picture, yes.
And then the more I know now, older I've gotten, it's most, I don't want to say most, I have no idea what the percentage is. There is a high percentage of businesses that are just barely scraping by or not profitable at all. And they're being subsidized by people like literally going working jobs to keep their business running, you know, which again, that there may be a case where that makes sense, but I think this would still apply. Everything you said would be the same thing. So they're in this unprofitable situation and they're concerned. They feel like they have to do more and more, but what I heard at least is like, hey, first know what you're working towards. Yeah. Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, you know?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the next would be start letting the chocolates pass that don't need to be done or delegate them out. Yeah, you didn't finish that scene. It was hilarious. They're stuffing chocolates all over the place. They're, you
in
know,
their hats and their mouths.
And that's what business owners are doing. These chocolates are passing by. They're like, I can't let that chocolate go by. Yeah. This task can't go by. I can't take care of it now. I'm going to shove it in my, you know, and it's obviously silly. But it's a really good visual representation because it's also silly for your business. It's like, you're not doing that thing correct, or you're not really doing it at all. You're just like touching it in some way to make yourself feel better. But anyways, so for someone that's not profitable, you would give that same advice, I'm assuming. Like,
well, yeah, because I think that the outcome has to be how am I going to make that possible, right? Like, so I mean, if the goal is I want to run an unprofitable business that just makes me happy, well, okay, now you got to also figure out some other way to generate cash that's going to offset that, right? So now you need, you know, maybe they need to talk to you about buying a bunch of rental properties so that they can create some passive income to support the thing they want to spend their days doing, right?
Right.
And you see a version of that where I imagine the Japanese bootmaker is probably charging a premium price for that. And he's making the kind of living he wants to make, even though he's making one pair of boots a week or a month or whatever it is. Like it's, you know, but a lot of people, what they want is effectively a glorified hobby, right? They just want to be able to do this thing. And if they can sort of break even or not lose too much doing it, they have the ability to manage that. Well, that's an outcome too. Like I don't care about the outcome.
Right.
But, most people don't want that, right? Most people are not saying, how do I get, because there's so much risk with business.
Yes.
It is, I've heard someone said, you know, like if you're not getting more of what you want out of your business, just get a regular job. True. Because there's way less personal risk to you in that. Now, sure, your company can downsize. There's no absolute security anywhere.
Right.
But you bear so much less risk. You just got to go find a different job as opposed to inventory and leases and all sorts of things that can encumber you as a small business owner. And so if you're not getting something that you hope for out of this business, which starts with profit, then maybe it's time to consider, is there an alternative? Is there another way that you could scratch the itch you have for the thing you love about life that isn't this, because this isn't working? Like, I'm a realist in that regard, and sometimes the conversations are there isn't a magic bullet that just makes the thing that you want to work.
Right.
Sometimes the market says no. Yeah. And you have to go try another idea, or you have to go get a real job. I'm just saying there's no like guarantee that you talk to the right person and you could make any business, any idea, any enterprise work perfectly for you.
Well, what's the percentage of businesses that fail in the first 5 years?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So we know that businesses are hard. Yeah. We know that like 90% of them are destined to go nowhere. And yet I think a big issue is people stuck in those situations is, and not always, sometimes, like I said, it's a total passion. They have to have this thing, whatever it is. A lot of time it's the pride of being seen as a failure.
Sure.
And it's so, I don't want to say silly, because I know I would feel the same way. Yeah. But really, if we look at it and take the emotions out of it, it's like, you know, if you were the 10%, you're really lucky, you know? So be willing to start another business, or you don't have to, but just know like, hey, this is really not a failure at the end of the day. Just like we talked about, like everything's for the good. You know, Jocko Willink, okay. Yeah. His whole, like, he's got this whole thing, just good. Anything that happens, just say good. Whether it's good or bad in your life, good. Yeah. And he literally, like, I just saw he had like his whole jiu-jitsu gym burned down like a month ago. He's walking through the wreckage.
Good.
Yeah, the whole time. And you're like, that's a pretty horrendous thing. If your business burns down, of course, he has other incomes, I'm sure. But
he's probably doing okay.
He's probably doing all right. Not worried about old Jocko. But he's someone that you would feel like if that was his whole life, he would feel the same way.
Devastated. Yeah.
So knowing that, and knowing that sometimes there is, there is a time to quit. There's a time to pull the ripcord and say, hey, this is not working for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I was going to tell a story, but they probably don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear this on a podcast. But I've had a friend, at least, will say, that had to make that decision. And his life after got so much easier and better. But he was pushing and pushing on this immovable wall, it felt like, for years.
And that's it. Yeah. Like we see so often with blinders on, right? We see, this is the path I'm on. This is what success looks like. And I can't see something outside of that, right? Yeah. So this client that I'm like, what if you didn't get on the plane? There wasn't a moment that they ever considered that was a possibility, right? And I get to, as a consultant, I get to show up and I don't have any of the emotion that a client has about their thing. And so I just get to ask questions. And in some cases, why don't get on? What if you don't get on the plane? That doesn't work. That's not going to be possible. Okay, well, let's talk about something else. Yeah. There's also absolutely no emotion in, I have to give you good advice. I don't give people advice, really. I offer them options. Right?
Yes.
What about this? Have you thought about that? Have you looked at it from this way? So I think of what I do as a consultant far more about how do we take whatever it is you've got in front of you and flip it over and turn it and knock it off the desk and, put it up high on a shelf. How do we see it from as many different angles as possible so that you have the opportunity to say, oh, you know what? I don't have almost any answers for clients where I just come in and say, this is the thing you absolutely need to do it today. Sometimes you see something like that, but mostly they know what to do, but it's so personal to them. It's really hard. And in some ways you're just somebody who's giving them permission to do something that they're afraid to do. Yeah. You're saying, well, why wouldn't that work? Or why isn't that an option?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I feel the exact same way in real estate. Because when I got started, I felt very much like I was the guy making the decisions. And that was the wrong way to go about it. So I have so much pressure on me for these people buying a house or selling a house or whatever it was. And it just came to me. It's like, hey, listen, here's the situation. Like all I do is communicate the situation and give, again, same thing. Sometimes we have to flip things around and get weird and get funky. Like, hey, you want this house? Here's some options. Here's some non-conventional options we could even try. But at the end of the day, it's up to them. Like they want the house or they want the business, or they don't want the business or whatever. They want to get on the plane or they don't. It's like, hey, you sometimes do box yourself in, or like in my particular case, people are buying houses once or whatever, every 5-7 years. They don't know what the options are. So I'm almost there just be like, hey, these are options that are available. And they're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. So I'm sure have some similarities to that. We're like, hey, I'm working in this other business that did this thing. And they're like, huh, I didn't even think about doing it that way.
100%. Yeah. And so to me, that part of that is why I have such a great luxury of talking to so many different people. And everybody thinks their problems are special. And I get to see it over and over again. And I'm like, hey, I don't mean to burst your bubble here. I got good news. I got bad news. The good news is other people are dealing with. So the bad news is it's not as special as you think it is. It's not quite as, you're not the unicorn that you think you are. But the good news is that this is something that lots of people are wrestling with. You are absolutely not special in having this problem or in wrestling with this situation. And that can be very liberating for people because sometimes it does feel like I must be the only one. And you talked about, you sort of see this picture of business owners as you were coming up. And there is so often this, even unintentional, I won't even say it's necessarily on purpose, but this unintentional veneer, because you would never as a small business owner want to go out in public and be like, yeah, it's not working. Man, I do not know what I'm doing, right? No one ever would think to do that because it betrays why would someone trust you to do the thing you do? And yet, so many small business owners are wrestling with all the same kind of things. And it's like, I would love to just be able to pull a bunch of people in the room and be like, yeah, you all have the same problem. Just talk to one another. You guys are all wrestling with the same thing. And you're pretending like you're the only one.
Well, I think there is an interesting point there, because there is a balance. Because I've been in businesses that are obviously not profitable, or at least from the outside perspective, the owner is dour and, too willing to talk about how bad business is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is I don't just being honest, I don't want to go back to that business generally, because it's not that I don't want to support local people or anything like that. It's just man, you got to poor attitude or something. But so there is this line of where I don't want to give off hey, I'm this whatever I am. Yeah. But also I don't want to be hey, I suck at my job and you should never come here because I'm so bad at it. You know what I mean? So it is this weird, you feel like you have to put up a facade.
Yeah.
So what would you, recommendation would you give in that case of being as honest as you can, I guess, or, what's
to me that comes down to trusted networks. I think sometimes we are so insular and the fear of not being as good as it just creates more of that insulation, right? The more that I'm concerned that other people are doing better, that they've got it figured out in a way that I don't, the more I want to isolate myself because I don't measure up. I can tell you very clearly, because I didn't go to college, there was a point in my career where I was very wary of speaking up too much, because I was sure that all the MBAs were going to be well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This is silly. And it wasn't until I started to dabble in talking about what my perspectives were and to talk about how I viewed small business that I realized that sort of unusual, or maybe non-book based, this isn't what you're going to learn in MBA school, right? That part of a small business for me is the customer I serve and the people I take care of. That's a very personal thing. That is not just numbers in a spreadsheet. It matters to me that we're well respected in the community, and that, all these other kind of things.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I sort of dabbled in saying that out loud that I was oh, the weird thing is attractive to some people, right? And the thing that isn't exactly the textbook kind of thing. And I think that without a trusted network around you, other small business owners, other people who have some similarity to you, I think there's value in people who aren't similar to you as well.
Yeah.
But without that kind of network of people that you can trust and that you can say, this is actually really hard. You're not saying it out loud to everybody. You're not, Facebook, hey, everything's difficult. I hate everything. But I think you have to have those people. And so as a coach, I get to do that for people. And I think that is, to me, that is it has been important to me in the past. And I know it's not the same as having a friend, because you pay a coach. But I think having someone that you can say, oh my goodness, there's so much relief in saying out loud this thing. And now we can actually start looking at ways to solve for these things, as opposed to just being I got to carry it by myself. Yeah.
I think a lot of it too, and you're talking about speaking up and just being who you are too, is something that I've been saying more recently, and it's totally freeing, is I say stupid stuff all the time and I embarrass myself, and I'm going to continue to do so. Because it's true. I'll say something and you think, that wasn't the smartest thing. You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, if you're embarrassed by it, which you can be, and maybe I will be embarrassed, but I had, this was a funny one. I had a client we were showing. They had been visiting Fairbanks for a long time. They come live here in the summers, kind of snowbirding it. And they decided they're going to make the leap, and she's going to stay a whole winter. And she was very concerned. She's I've never been in cold weather like this before. So anyways, we're getting snow. She comes to a showing and she's in a full onesie, zip up puffy thing. And I was I actually thought it was cool. Legitimately in my mind, I'm thinking that's pretty cool. And I said, well, you got to be pretty brave to wear that out and about. Right? Sure, it's pretty stupid. It's a pretty stupid thing to say. So afterwards, the next showing, I was hey, I kind of thought about what I said and I want to apologize for it. She's and she's not wearing it. She's I'm never wearing that again. Of course, the husband thought it was hilarious. Yeah. But I was hey, sorry, you should wear it. I thought it was actually cool. That's a cool idea, but it's just a spacesuit for.
Sometimes between your brain and your mouth, It sounds really great on one end and then not as great on the other.
But the converse of that is if I'm like, well, I'm never going to make that mistake again, and it's me making way less jokes, and I really like to make jokes. It's like I'm that's not who I am. So it's like, sometimes I may offend people, and it's again never you shouldn't like intentionally be offensive and whatnot. I don't really agree with that either. But it's at the end of the day, you are important to someone, and what you're saying is going to be important to someone. Yeah. So like you, especially with the consulting, this is very direct. Like if you never had the guts, or you always thought you were less than because you didn't have a college degree, which I'm pulling into question more and more these days. The validity of those. Yeah. But you think of the businesses you wouldn't have helped. And of course you probably wouldn't be here or talking to me and such, which is a huge honor, I know.
Oh, yes.
So we had, we kind of previously discussed talking about, being overwhelmed in business, which everybody is. And it sounds like a topic that you're constantly going over. Yeah. And you also threw in and being stuck in business. Mm-hmm. And I had those kind of as almost two separate talking points in my head, but I feel like they're kind of the same. Like they're
at least two sides of the same coin. Yeah. They're very connected.
Like everything you're saying is like, hey, you've got all this stuff going on, but what the overwhelm is doing is it's keeping you in the same spot. So how do you, again, I feel like you've answered it pretty well. Like you're just.
Well, but vice versa as well. Yeah. Sometimes people are overwhelmed because they're stuck. They believe they should be making progress. They believe that they should be building a business in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And they don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. Or they don't know what the next steps are. And so that feeling of being stuck is incredibly overwhelming because you just feel like I'm falling behind, right? Everything else is growing and advancing. And man, I tell you what, I have to chill out with Instagram sometimes because you're scrolling around and you see somebody who's doing it better, faster, smarter, whatever. And you're like, well, why wouldn't everyone just go to them? Forget it. And there is this element of like, I feel like I'm working so hard, but I'm not making the same progress as someone else, which is that's not a great way to operate from, right? It's like, how do I measure up to everyone else? And yet I think it's a very natural thing. And so I am wise enough in my old age to be like, I got to turn this off because that's not good for me right now. Right? And I got to let go of that. But I think some people, it is harder to do that. Or I think of my daughter's 17. She's grown up in a world where, the iPhone was released 6 months after she was born. Yeah. And to me, it's like, whoa, that was like this major new world-changing thing. And it has been a part of her. She didn't have one when she was 6 months old, but a part of her like awareness for her entire life. Yeah. And how do younger people who are starting businesses and getting out there and doing the thing they do, I don't think all of them have the wisdom to say social media is not real. And when I feel a way about it, I can turn it off. Yeah. And I can let go of that thing for a period. And so I think for a lot of folks, there is this sense of like trying to parse out what is real about my circumstance versus what is the way I feel about it. Yeah. And that's where I think having someone who can come alongside you and have those conversations with you, about like, well, here's where I think that you may be exaggerating your circumstance. Like you may feel this much more strongly than it really is affecting, I think those things are really important. And so
I think it's interesting to bring up because what we've been talking about and what I've been thinking about is, especially with overwhelm, is a chicken run around with the head cut off, kind of, like we were talking about Lucy and Ethel there in the chocolate factory, just like going and going and going and maybe not making any forward motion. But what it reminded me of is my first year in real estate. Again, it's a lot of new things. And there was so much for me to do. There were days I was too embarrassed to go home because I feel like I could not function. So I would just get in my car. I would literally drive around for 6 hours doing absolutely nothing. And I knew there was stuff I had to do. Like, it wasn't like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to like chill out in my car. It's like, I have like a laundry list of things to do. And I am just trying to not think about those right now. And I don't think that's talked about enough because for one, it sounds lazy and it probably is lazy. And at the time, like I don't do it anymore, obviously.
It's self-preservation though. At some level, like it doesn't work very well, but that's what you're doing to try to like save yourself.
Exactly. So I think people can get, and again, obviously that would be a very good representation of just being like totally stuck. Like I have this whole foray of things that need to be done. Yeah. And I'm just like, I can't even right now being, and to get stuck in the spot that I'm at. So do you see that as well? Or is it usually
100%. Yeah. So usually in a lot of situations when I'm talking to a client on the phone, they show up with something that they aren't sure what to do about. And sometimes that's a conversation they need to have, uncomfortable. They don't want to have it, but they sort of know they do need to have it. So we talk about how they can have that conversation in a healthy way.
Right.
Sometimes it is, I know I'm heading this direction, but I don't know what steps I need to take. And we talk through options for how they can proceed. But the idea is they show up in minute 1, unsure about something, and they leave at the end of that call feeling like, I know what to do now.
Yeah.
I'm going to go do that thing. And then, it depends from client to client. I have some clients that I work with every week, some clients that it's, a month between calls. And so it's then recalibration. Like, so what worked? When you went out and did the things. But effectively, what we're trying to do is move someone from feeling that feeling of stuckness to action. I can remember when you can't find a stick shift almost anywhere on a car. But when I was learning to drive, I learned to drive on a stick, right?
Right.
And it seemed to me that there were 1,500 things to be paying attention to while you're driving this car. And there's all the stuff on the dash, and you got to figure out the clutch, and there's other cars on the roadway once you get to that point. And I think that overwhelm can look like, oh my goodness, everything is happening all at once and I don't know what to pay attention to. And overwhelm can also look like sitting in the cockpit of that car and being like, I don't know where to start.
Right.
There's so many different things.
Yeah.
So we're just helping someone who's in that state of frenzy, isolate, okay, well, what are the most essential things to pay attention to, right? Maybe we're helping them pull off to the side of the road and say, you're not ready to have all those things on your plate. How do we figure out how to distill some of these things down to the essentials? How do we get you some help to take some of these things off your plate? And on the other side of that, we're helping the person who doesn't know how to, I'm afraid to turn the car on, right?
Right.
We're helping them figure out, well, what do you need to know to make you feel more comfortable? Like, where do you need to go to learn the lesson to, I'm looking at pickleball. This is how old I am. I'm looking at pickleball as something, because I hate exercise, but I like playing games.
Hey.
If there's a game that gets me moving, I'm exercising, and I don't think I'm exercising, right?
Are you just thinking about it, or have you been doing it?
I've been researching on YouTube.
Yeah.
I've been like, what are the rules? How do I do this? Because I know that between me and pickleball, so I have a friend who is a big pickleballer here in town. And the way she talks about it, I'm like, it's the pickleball mafia.
Yeah.
I mean, they're serious about pickleball, right? And so that can be a little intimidating. So the last thing I want to do is just show up and be like, I don't know what to do. Show me.
Yeah.
I want to come in with at least some sort of awareness.
Sweatbands.
And then, I want to have talked to the right people about what's an appropriate way to get started. And I know some folks, they're serious and they don't want a beginner. And other folks are much more interested in how to help somebody learn, right? And so I take the idea of pickleball and I'm breaking that down into, what are the steps I need to take to get me to the point where I'm ready to step on a court and actually do something about that. And that is a very small microcosm of what a lot of people feel about what they're doing in their business.
Yeah.
I know that there's this thing that I want, but I don't know how to get there. Or I know I should have this thing that I want, but I've never said it out loud and I don't know how to really develop that vision. I call it puzzle box clarity. Yeah. Like the picture on the outside of the puzzle makes the whole puzzle much simpler. And there are people who want to do a puzzle upside down and backwards, like they want to make it harder than it needs to be. A puzzle to me is like, it is a relaxing thing to do, right?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make it impossible. And when you have that clarity about what the final outcome is supposed to look like, well, I can start putting some of these pieces together and some of those pieces together because they're similar and I know that they go in this part of the puzzle. And now someone could even help me. We're not going to be working against one another because they can see I'm working on this side, they're working on that side, and that's where things go. And when we have puzzle box clarity, we are better equipped to know what to do, and we're better equipped to give that vision to somebody else and help them help us, whether those are employees that are on our team or contractors that we work. I mean, I think of what you do, right? Like, I think people think of delegating as I must have an employee to delegate. But I'm like, I'm going to delegate to a realtor, like how to parse a lot of this information that I don't want to have to know every bit of it. I want to be able to go to an advisor and say, what does this mean? Can you help me understand this? and not have to learn it all.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have that, when I can communicate to you what I'm looking for in a home and what I want that experience to be like, and where you have a much easier job of figuring out what to show me.
Right.
Than you would if I'm just like, it's like, it's got walls and probably like a roof. That's pretty important to me.
Yeah.
That leaves it open to a lot of different outcomes. So anyway, I think that it is always about moving someone from a state of paralysis, whether that's because there's too much happening or not enough, to a state of calculated action.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the puzzle box mentality there. And it's what you've been saying, but you have a vision for what it is. And I love when you brought in the second person, so everyone can see that vision and know what it is. Even people that maybe, like you're saying, maybe not even employees. Yeah. It's like, if you are talking to your friends and you have a very clear vision on what you want your business to be or whatever, and maybe that comes up. I found this all the time. People call it like, I forget what they call it, like the secret, like you're drawing things towards yourself.
Manifesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the fancy word they're using. But yeah, it's true. It's like, oh, hey, I've got somebody who can help you with that. But if you're like, I don't really know what's going on, like no one's going to think of someone to help you because you don't even know what you're doing. So that's an excellent way to think about it. I do have, it's a little bit off topic, but you sent me your bio and stuff before, which is super helpful. The Simon Sinek conversation. Yeah. How did that go? I'm a huge fan of his. Well, I shouldn't say that. I haven't listened to something in a long time.
So this to me is very similar kind of thing, but except for without the total vision. Mm-hmm. Simon ran a contest on some learning platform. I can't remember what it was, but effectively they were like, it was a storytelling. They wanted you to talk about your business, but they wanted you to tell a story about it. And so the best story was going to win time with Simon. And I was fortunate to come out on top in that. And so I got to spend about 45 minutes over Zoom, Skype probably at that point. It was a little bit ago. But
man, Skype really fumbled, didn't they? What happened with them?
But it was great because he was, and we don't keep in touch. I don't know him since then. Yeah. But he was just a dude. Yeah. I mean, he looked a little bit like he had just woken up. Like, I mean, his hair was kind of askew. Yeah. And it was just like, it didn't seem like there was a big put on. It wasn't some big scripted thing where it was like, you the smile and then like a little sparkle in the teeth, because it's all, smoke and mirrors. We just talked. We talked about public speaking and we talked about, communicating ideas. Mm-hmm. And I've never particularly liked to present with slides. Mm-hmm. And I commented on like whenever I see him speak, or at least up to that point, he usually has a flip chart that he's writing on with a marker, and he's not using slides. And I was like, is that on purpose? Like, what's behind that? And he shared something that I also believed was like, he's like, the slides will betray you. At some point, you're going to say, I want to go left instead of right. Mm-hmm. And because I think that that's the best way to communicate what I'm trying to communicate. Mm-hmm. But the slides will always tell the audience what you were supposed to do. Yeah. He's like, with a flip chart, I can flip back and forth. I can write whatever I want. And I loved that idea because, again, to me, it was much more about saying, I want to have a like authentic engagement with the audience than to be, I have 73 slides that are all on rails, and what you hear today is going to be exactly what someone hears tomorrow and what someone hears the next day. And I'm going to punch all the same jokes in exactly the same way. Yeah. And I think as an audience, what you're looking for in a lot of cases is you want something real, and you want to feel like something that happened today isn't a thing that ever happened before or that happened in a different way. So it was a fantastic conversation. And I just felt like he was as down to earth as could be. And again, that's been 8 or 10 years ago probably now. Yeah. So
I think it's important. It's important. So you've accomplished a lot of cool things. You've, especially like outward facing as well. So you did a TEDx talk, which was pretty cool. Also it was really cool. I don't want to downplay you here. But all the different things. And it's really nice to remember, and this is, I always say this, it almost sounds like an insult what I'm telling you. This is not a backhanded compliment, but it's nice to know that you're just a guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's it. I am. That's
right,
it. Yeah.
Right. And even Simon, like they're just like.
So is everybody.
Yeah, right? So is everybody. Because I think that, especially coming up, I was, iPhone came out, I was in mid-high school, we'll say, but social media kind of came along with that. and YouTube and different things, and these business thought leaders changed from like Napoleon Hill in books in the early 1900s to like Gary Vee. And celebrity style business. It was very different. And so it very much seemed to me, at least, that they had something that other people didn't have. And again, it was like, oh, they made $1 million when they were in high school selling suckers or whatever the thing is. It's nice to know. And again, you can look back and see these things, but it's like, hey, you dropped out of college, or slid off, however you want to say it. You know, you didn't know what you were doing.
I didn't go back.
Didn't go back. You know, and I'm not trying to make this sound negative, but you could skew a lot of your choices to be negative, especially in the moment. You know, if you were thinking, what would my parents think of this decision right now? They may be like, well, that's probably not the smartest idea, son.
They did not think that was the smartest idea.
Exactly. So yeah, you just never know which way things are going to go. And again, like being able to ride with it, and discipline is freedom. Like having your life disciplined where you can have these options open up. And I've talked about moving a lot. And one of the things that gave me the ability to move and to do real estate in different areas where I don't have like a guaranteed paycheck. So when I move, I'm starting completely over, and I'm not going to have a paycheck in 2 weeks. I'm probably not going to have one for 3 to 6 months. You know, but what did give me the ability and the freedom to do those things was that I was very disciplined with my money beforehand, you know, because if I had no savings or anything, I'm stuck in Fairbanks because I have to be, maybe not because I want to be or whatever. So I think people forget that, and they live for today. I always try to think, future Blake, how is future Blake going to feel about this decision? You know, and I don't always choose right. Sometimes, but
well, and future Blake knows a lot more than you know, right?
Exactly.
So sometimes you look back and you're like, I wish I had done that different, but who can spend this money better? Let's say just one particular thing. It's like, is it going to be me or future Blake? Sorry, let's save this and invest this in a way where future Blake is going to have more of it to play with or whatever. And I think that is always an ongoing battle. But then there's the other side where it's like, you want to go to Hawaii. You know, it's like, hey, well, take time to go to Hawaii. You don't have to always be going. But man, thank you so much for coming out. Is there anything else that we missed? No, well, the only other thing I will offer is people can go to jeffwelch.com/playbook and grab a copy of what I call my anti-overwhelm playbook, just some places to get you started so that you can start to maybe take more calculated and intentional action as opposed to feel like you're being just led around by the day. The day is running you.
Yes. And Geoff does have a podcast. I'm glad you brought that up. You are the boss of your business?
Your business is not your boss.
Thank you. Yeah. So we're saying the same thing here. But I was listening to that, and you had plugged that as well there. And I was like, oh shoot, I didn't have time this morning. I was like, I want to read through that. But yeah, wonderful, man. Thank you so much. This has been great.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
All right. Talk to you soon. Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. If you want more content from AK Blake, you can find me on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, all under the handles AK Blake. Or if you want to listen to more podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, it's there, Fairbanks year-round. You may or may not know, I am a local real estate agent here in Fairbanks with the Summit Realty Group. So if you like what I'm doing and you want to move to the area, you already live in the area, or you're looking to invest further into real estate in the area, you can reach me. Probably the best will be either my website, akblake.com, my email, blake@akblake.com, or my phone number is probably the fastest, 907-651-8356. You can call or text. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.